Hello, I'm Stephen Cole and welcome to Talk to Al Jazeera. I'm talking to Mohamed Nasheed, President of the Maldives. The Maldives is a country made up of over 1,000 islands, some of which are threatened directly by climate change. The President is in London to try and build some momentum for the Cancun Climate Change Summit, but he faces an uphill task because climate change is rapidly disappearing from the international radar. Mr. President, a lot of people have this sense of foreboding about Cancun. Are you optimistic?
Well, I've always thought that ultimately and finally we have to find solutions for our problems. We were not able to reach the level of expectations or deliver on the level of expectations in Copenhagen. But I think we were able to make progress in Copenhagen. And then now when we go to Cancun, if we are able to wedge in or anchor the main features of the Copenhagen Accord to the UNFCCC process, I think that is progress. And then by the time we go to South Africa, we would be in a better position to have the conversation on legally binding agreements. But having said this, I'm also hearing that we might be able to come up with some form of a legal agreement in Cancun as well. I think countries are trying to find a focus group on the legal framework issue. So there is movement, and I think we will be able to come up with solid understandings sooner rather than later.
Why then such a sense of foreboding about Cancun? I mean, the Indian Environment Minister sees Cancun as a last chance for climate talks to succeed. That's not good news.
No, it's not good news at all. And I don't think, as long as we are alive, any effort would be a last effort. The last effort would be the effort that we make while we die.
But, in Copenhagen ended in disappointment, and people in Copenhagen pinned their hopes on Cancun. You're now pinning your hopes on South Africa.
No, I don't think after Copenhagen, if we take our mind back, soon after Copenhagen there was great skepticism on climate change issues. We first saw the IPCC reports, the analysis being ridiculed, the science being questioned. But if we look into the IPCC report, the mistakes in that report, it's a very big report, doesn't bring any material difference to the facts.
But it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, the IPCC report certainly highlights the science and where we should be going. So I think the facts are still very clear, the science is very sorted, and we understand where we want to go.
But would a disappointing outcome endanger the whole process?
If we are facing life-threatening issues, how can any process or anyone actually challenge it and stop it? In our mightiness, we might think that what we do in Cancun and Copenhagen and South Africa is going to make this material difference. The world will decide, the people will decide, and in my mind, as we delay longer, the remedy required would be more painful.
Which is why perhaps it's disappearing off the international agenda. I come back to that point, and the fact that interest on both sides of the Atlantic is waning rapidly.
No, the point I'm trying to make is that even though it's the short-term political agenda of politicians might not include climate change today, that doesn't mean the issue is any better, or we are being able to have a better grip on the situation. No, it just simply means that we are neglecting the most important issue of the day. Now, yes, the United States is far more skeptical than many other countries, but I don't think Europe is, and I think Europe is really moving along a very proper path of renewable energy and low carbon production. And I think that's the way to go. And I believe that we will be able to find solutions, and we just can't afford not to.
Perhaps we should take the advice of the British government's chief scientist and, instead of thinking about global warming, start preparing for a warmer world rather than affecting climate change.
Well, just concentrating on adaptation measures is a line of thinking that you should be concentrating on. I don't disagree with that. But these are symptoms. And if you can't deal with the actual issue of emissions and how we may be able to mitigate that, the symptoms would be far bigger for us to be able to handle.
Well, the point about emissions is nobody's interested really at senior government level in reducing them. Britain has a good record, but we're talking now about the really big emitters like China and America and India and Russia to a certain extent. They're not interested in Cancun, South Africa, and they weren't interested in Copenhagen. And that's the problem.
I think if we look at the issue from another side, very often we've always thought and argued and debated climate change as an earth science issue. In my mind, it's not just simply an earth science issue. We're not just talking about hugging a tree. It's an economic issue. It's a very solid economic issue. Now, many countries in the East, South Korea being an example, they are very rapidly coming out with renewable energy technology. And they are making it very cheap, and they're producing a lot of it. One fine day, to sell all that technology, everyone has to agree upon a binding agreement. And I believe that it would be, once countries have an edge in technological production, they will turn around and soon say, yes, we need a legally binding agreement. And those who have been trying to protect their traditional hard diesel fuel industries and the equipment relating to that industry, Detroit or Cummins or whoever, who are producing these engines, and they've been trying to protect them. Now, while others have decided that these are obsolete technologies, we should move forward and let's go and invest in renewables. Many developing countries are doing that, and I think they would be far the better for having done that.
We live in austere times. No country is going to deliberately put itself at a competitive disadvantage through climate change and making changes associated with global warming, are they?
It's very silly. It's height of naivety to think that austerity measures should involve not thinking about a shift in technology, a shift in investment patterns. If we again try to correct our economics through the past mistakes and again going to the past mistakes, we would go nowhere. And what I'm suggesting is that there are countries and there are people and there are institutions who understand these issues, and our friends in the very far west are unable to quite get a very good grip on what is happening. But I think the Chinese are, the South Koreans are, they understand what is going on, and they are producing all these renewable energy, and soon they will have to sell them. And when they want to sell them, they would of course come out and say, we need a legally binding agreement. What I'm saying here, what I'm pointing out here is that there is a whole other economic argument, economic reality that is pointing us towards exactly the same things that we are calling for. And no one can stop that.
How do you persuade them of your version of economic reality?
No, you don't persuade them. The mechanism finds it out and they do it. Now, what they are now seeing is, I mean, China's done it. It's already done. South Korea's done it. They've put so much money in renewable energy investments. They are producing all that, and we are buying it. Now, for a developing country like the Maldives or Indonesia or Malaysia, the question you are confronted is, do we go to yesterday's technology and buy a diesel generator, or do we buy solar panels from China? Of course, when the capital expenditure is the same for both sets of equipment, and if recurrent expenditure is so cheap with renewables, you will definitely go for renewable energy. Now, if you are brave enough to embrace the future, you will be the winner. But if you want to protect the past, you will lose out in this. So I'm sorry that our friends in the West have not really got a good grip on what is happening here. They will hopefully at one day come around to it, but the mistake would be that they would be late. It's not our problem, it's their problem.
Well, you're watching Talk to Al Jazeera with President Mohamed Nasheed of the Maldives. We're going to take a break, but coming up afterwards, I'll be asking the President about his record on climate change and global warming in the Maldives and what he sees as the most immediate threat to his island country. That's after the break. Welcome back to Talk to Al Jazeera with President Mohamed Nasheed of the Maldives. Mr. President, what's your own record like on global warming and climate change? Because you have a target of being, if you like, a non-polluter by 2020, if I can call it that.
Well, we set ourselves a target of becoming carbon neutral by 2020. To do that, we have first done our carbon audit. We've found out how much carbon we emit and where, what are the areas, what are the industries, what are the sectors. So now we are coming up with an investment plan on how to achieve that. And by April, we will have the investment plan. But we haven't waited until we've got the investment plan. We've always understood the basic fundamentals of the technology. And people have been always very willing to invest in these areas. So we've got renewable energy projects on the ground, moving now. And I feel that we will be a little earlier than we thought, and then 2020.
So you're on target?
We're on target, and we are very nicely moving along our targets, and we have all our plans, we have all our projects, we have all our feasibilities done. And I think, for us, we spend a fair amount of our foreign currency revenue income on buying oil. And if we go business as usual, we won't have the income to buy oil and then food and then other necessities. So for us, it's an economic argument as well as much as an earth science issue.
And do you see the Maldives setting an example the rest of the world can follow?
I think we will come out with a low carbon development strategy that others can use it as a blueprint. Of course, Maldives is just 300,000 people, but what we have to understand here is even China is a collection of homes. So it's not so huge. Every home is a home. And we're thinking we have to focus on what to do with that home. So if we can have clusters of 300,000 people, clusters of 100,000 homes, and if these clusters can become carbon neutral, rural India, rural China, the new technology in rural India and rural China can really be renewable energy, and it will succeed. And we're very confident that we will be able to implant that in these countries.
Is everybody on board with you, Mr. President? Or are you having to fight a battle with your tourist bosses because you want sustainable tourism? Your country lives and dies by tourism. That must be a big battle to fight when they're saying we want more tourists and you're saying we want sustainable tourism.
We want sustainable tourism. We want fisheries. We want aquaculture. We want other industries to run.
You want a tourist tax?
We want a tourist tax, and we will already introduce a GST tax on tourism. And tourism will be expensive, but it will be sustainable. We have to look after our reefs. We have to be able to save whatever we can save. And I think we are moving along, and very often industry understands this. Big tourist companies that operates in the Maldives, the first people to become carbon neutral in the Maldives would be tourist resorts. Because they know where their clientele is. They know what the people want. So it's corporate affairs always change rather more rapidly than state affairs.
What are the key areas you've identified where you have cut or want to cut greenhouse gas emissions that the rest of the world could learn from?
Transport, of course, electricity generation. So these are the two main areas, transport and electricity generation. Electricity generation is in very many ways easier than transport. But we are fortunate that bulk of our transport is sea transport, and then we can use solar panels to drive motors to run our boats. And we've got prototypes running now. And if we are able to invest on them, they will be the first prototypes for this kind. And we've got South Korean companies investing in it.
You have taken a lead, a global lead, in warning of climate change because it's going to affect you most directly. But there has been a crisis of leadership in the climate change movement. Certainly Rajendra Pachauri, many people find him unconvincing. Are you disappointed in his leadership and the global campaign?
Existing global governance structures, especially multilateral organizations, I've always argued that they are very archaic. They were there to serve the problems of the Second War and what came from that. And of course, coming to today with new issues and new problems, we would need new structures. Sarkozy, the French president, has always spelled this out very well, that we need new structures. We need new governing mechanisms.
And you need new leadership.
Well, I think new leadership will come from new structures, and unless we are able to come up with new structures.
But you'd agree Pachauri has been a disappointment?
I think he's been a very good contributor to the climate change argument.
And few people would agree with you there?
I've seen the work that he's done. I've seen the maths that he's done. I've seen the very, very long tenure that he has served in consistently addressing this problem. And yes, of course, now it's in a sense more media worthy, and then we want to find new people.
But the point is, he hasn't put a convincing case together, especially to defend the developing world's poorest.
I think if any new leader will find this issue. It's not a developing country, developed country issue. Big emitting issues. I mean, India, China, USA, they're the same. So it's going to be very difficult for anyone now to come up and say, because the industrialized world has emitted so much carbon, we have a right for carbon emission. That's extremely silly.
But you need leadership now more than ever. I mean, you're not going to get it out of America, are you? Especially with the Republican gains. You're not going to see any more green legislation there. So you need a leader who's going to actually capture the world's imagination and take your campaign forward. And that person isn't there.
I think we don't know where the leader might come from. It might very well come from China or India or Brazil, South Africa. It probably will come from a developing country. We've exhausted the West in ideology and in patterns. And, there's always difficulty, for instance, in the United States to go into new networks because they've already laid all these networks long time ago. I always use the mobile phone network. I mean, it's always easier to ring someone in India and China than ringing someone in New York. Because in New York, they've laid trunks and the landlines were laid the early 1900s. So for them, the new technology was always an intrusion for existing technology. So therefore, mobile phones rapidly expanded in developing countries. I think with many new technologies, this would be the case.
You're not, though, going to change a legacy of mistrust, are you, between the rich and the poor countries? And you have to do that.
I don't remember colonialism. I don't have a hang-up with the past. We are another generation. I haven't got a clue of, when I say that, what I mean is, we are another generation. We can move forward. I don't have an issue with rich countries or poor countries.
But poor countries still distrust the richer countries because they're saying if they won't take action on emissions, why should we?
No, I disagree. I think there's a new generation coming up in India, coming up in China, coming up in the Maldives, who understand the mathematics and the equation, who understands the economics of it. And, we would say India, China, they would themselves commit for emission targets. They will give it because they will finally come up with a new technology and they will understand that there is no point. And they are rapidly doing that, far more rapidly than the industrialized world.
You're not going to Cancun.
No.
Are you disappointed? They don't want you there, do they?
I would have, I would have liked a legally binding agreement and a complete settlement to the whole issue. But we all would have liked the sun, moon, and the stars. But we can only do with what is available and what is possible. And then we have to live to fight another day. And we go on. We should not lose focus. We have to be optimistic, and we will remain optimistic. We believe that we can fight against the odds.
What would your message be to the leaders of China and America?
Lead. Don't follow the pack. Lead.
But they're not interested in leading.
How
do you persuade them, Mr. President? Because
their people.
there's a crisis.
No, their people. Their people would have to decide on this. Their people would have to tell them that this is the kind of.
But it's not on the people's agenda. Jobs are on the people's agenda.
Well, it is exactly jobs that will be created with the new technological revolution. We are on the thresholds of a new industrial revolution. Once that gets kicking, things would very, very rapidly change.
Well, you are an optimist, Mr. President, a confirmed optimist and a pragmatist. Are you hopeful you can beat this crisis in your lifetime?
I think, we've fought against many odds. I can only talk about my life. People have been very cynical about many things that I've tried to do. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're finding is that if you don't lose focus, and if you're at it every day, and if you're able to wake up early in the morning and do your thing and consistently do it, you will succeed. And I believe we will succeed in our lifetime.
President Mohamed Nasheed, thank you very much indeed. It's true to say that a breakthrough in negotiations in Cancun is unlikely. A breakdown is more on the cards. And some are more pessimistic, saying this could be the last chance to stop the world from getting warmer. Thank you, Mr. President.